Let's see. Yeah, no, we probably won't talk about. I don't know. We talk about. I got nothing. How do you feel about World of Warcraft these days? I got
Sucks, dude.
Sucks, dude. Is this like Kyle unmuted? You're laughing now, Kyle. Is this unmuted?
Pardon me. There was a nice echo that resounded because I had multiple windows open. So we are now live on our channel.
Shit.
That was the first moment.
Oh shit!
Yeah,
moment
it was perfect. It was perfect.
Echo's not going to work with me again.
Dead King, what can you do? Let's just look over a chat. I'm like, okay, everybody's on board with Frosty's WoW takes. Cool.
Oh, great! I am creating an anti-WoW podcast with you guys now. Apparently,
wonderful. Wonderful. Look forward to when we have our WoW buddies on again to talk more with it.
No, man. I mean, honestly, I played WoW when it first came out. You know, way back when, 2004, whatever, November, I think it was, or something like that.
04. So yeah, you were like launch of vanilla then.
Yep. And I played it for quite a while, all the way to Warlords of Draenor. And I think there's like this changing of guard where a lot of people started during that expansion and a lot of people left during that expansion.
Yeah, definitely. It felt, I'm with you. I mean, I had like quote unquote new school friends kind of all along the way. I picked up a bunch of new WoW friends in Pandaria. That's when suddenly I was rolling with like, it seemed like an entirely new crew.
Well, and I have your first podcast here listed as it was February 24th, 2015. Did you do any podcasting before then, or was Mog Talk?
No.
Nice.
I turned that shit on and I was like, hey, Static Mate, you want to talk to me about this game for a little bit?
Rip it, nice.
And we just ran with it and made it happen. No, like the streaming part, I wasn't even like, I tried streaming with Hearthstone for a little bit when it first came out, right?
Oh, hey, I did a ton of Hearthstone content. Yeah.
And then I was like, man, this kind of sucks. No one ever watches me. I stopped streaming. I went in and started playing Final Fantasy 14, and I got really into it, and the stream still existed, so I just used it to stream some stuff. And I was just like, it was right after FanFest, the first one, 2014 FanFest. And I was like, God, I am so amped to play this game for the rest of my life after that event. And I was so energetic about talking to people and everything else. Hey, I'm already giving you guys a podcast to answer right now.
Hey,
I am recording. So
records are on. Keep it going.
Podcast. All right. So basically, at that point, I still wanted to talk to people about Final Fantasy 14. Because it came an addiction. I've never experienced that before. I never went to a convention or a gaming thing at all. So I forced a podcast to exist for Final Fantasy 14, and I just started growing it from nothing. It was literally nothing. And back when I was trying to get guests on the show, no one knew who I was or anything else. But there wasn't a lot of podcasts out there for Final Fantasy 14 either. And I went and I would create characters on servers with people who are notable in some way, whether they're really good at their job, whether they did this thing in the community, whatever it may be for. And I made a podcast around it and just interviewed them. And I've been doing that for like 9 years. But luckily Discord and a whole bunch of other social stuff exists now, so I don't have to make characters and do this whole roundabout thing. But yeah, that's basically all it was. I didn't really know what I was doing when I got into podcasting. I just wanted to talk to people. That was it.
I feel like most folks don't, unless you're kind of in this modern age of podcasting where like really famous people are starting podcasts, and it's like, I'm sure, okay, they probably got contacted by some kind of studio that is basically making it for them. But yeah, if you're not already famous, like I would be like, who's not wicked famous and started podcasting knowing what they were doing? I started with like a headset mic.
I got a headset mic on right now. Don't talk crap about headset mics,
well,
all right?
Like a nice one. I had one that was probably made in 2002 that my mom had for work, and then she eventually replaced it, and that's what I moved to LA with, and that's what I started podcasting with.
Nice.
Okay.
So yeah, just like yours sounds good.
Mine sounds okay, right? It sounds pretty decent.
You go if someone out there has the first 4 episodes of our StarCraft podcast, it probably sounded like I was recording it on a Nextel walkie-talkie.
But that was the times, it was 2010, 11. No one cared yet.
That was the expected quality. Yeah. 100%.
I was listening to Warcraft podcasts, which is what inspired me to start podcasting, and they sounded great because they were being done by Scott Johnson, and that dude was a super talk radio nerd. And he and everyone that he worked with had professional grade microphones. And it was also like that, a bunch of the guys that would eventually go and work for Twit were also up in the mix. And so it was just all these tech nerds that had, the microphone that's sitting in front of me, because I bought this model because that's what they were all using.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
had this thing since 2013.
Sounds great.
I think. Kyle's, yours is even older.
Oh, yeah. No, mine was, I bought it with a scholarship that I got in college because I was looking into getting into voice acting, and then I realized I'm dyslexic and I can't read very well in cold auditions. So Garrett was one of the few guys that knew. He was like, hey, this guy's got a decent microphone. What's he doing with that in Chicago? I'm like, I'm trying to get Second City work. And they're like, let's do a podcast. It'll work out great.
I had a second code for the StarCraft 2 beta, and I knew you liked it. I was like, hey man, I'll send this to you, but you have to podcast about StarCraft with me.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That was the catch. I'll get you in the beta, but you got to make content with me.
You just need, it's so desperate to find someone to talk to, right? You're like, you play this game. I will help you play this game, but you have to help me. Just sit here and listen to me talk or something. I don't know, and respond sometimes.
I'm not sure how you grew up, Frosty. Were you ever in any sort of group content? Did you have a D&D group? Did you try and have a garage band?
I always tried, I guess, in some way. I grew up a lot on the internet, dude. So much. AOL. And I played these crappy MMO games that, you'd play if your computer was crap and couldn't handle EverQuest, right?
Landscape.
That as Tibia was the one that I got into.
Okay.
It was trash of trash. It still exists and still people play it a lot, but I just grew up in that stuff, and for some reason I always got into communities somehow or another. I was never doing podcast related stuff, but I was building guilds, or I was doing something social in some way, I suppose. When I'd hang out with my friends, my preteen days of rollerblading down around the apartment complex and trying to get my extreme sport friends going and doing stuff.
Oh, sweet. But you sound like you actually went for real MMOs. Was there no Neopets in there? Was there no
Neopets existed somewhere? Okay. I'm sure. Community wise with gaming, I think that I always wanted to, right? I go into a lot of my high school classes or something early high school, and I would find the people who were kind of nerdy or whatever, and they would play video games, and I'd try to cozy up with them all the time. Otherwise I was just silent, and I had my long hair, and I try to let it cover my eyes and try to just be stoic, I guess.
Aloof. Yes.
Yeah. My self-esteem issues were horrible back then, but I would always try to cozy up with them, and I found out they played Diablo or something. I'm like, hey man, you sound like someone I could hang out with for a little bit. I'll try to talk to them. It's so funny back then, people who were gaming and stuff weren't very social. And when you tried to be friends with them, they didn't really know how to react or anything. It wasn't until I was 16 that I found a couple of friends who were a little bit more social, and they wanted to do game nights and come over to our house and play Smash Brothers and drink Coca-Cola and whatever else. And that was really important for my growth as a gamer, I guess. But
you're sending me on a journey with this. Yeah. Did you move a lot growing up? Is that kind of where you...
Oh, I was poor as shit, dude. I bounced around so many times in apartment complexes, whatever it may have been, right? And so I would always have to make new friends everywhere I would go to. So yeah, moving around a lot.
My heart is pounding listening to you hear the story, because I remember just walking into new lunchrooms and just scanning for anything that looked like I'd be into
Magic cards.
Yeah,
Oh, dude,
exactly.
I gotta know them.
And I found like Yu-Gi-Oh kids. I watched the cartoon, so that like that's enough. That's enough for today. Let's just go sit by them and be like, "Can I watch?" I'm not gonna talk to you, but I'll watch.
And it was the other thing was like, you know, living in this like poor situation, and I didn't have like cable to watch like Adult Swim or do like all this other stuff. So if I found out someone like knew Dragon Ball Z stuff, I was like, I got to get around them because maybe I could get exposed to some anime. Right?
We found a second Kyle. Kyle and my entire friendship is me making like 90s Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network references and him going, what?
Oh my. The isolating feeling of not seeing Austin Powers soon enough was just destructive to my social sphere.
That I can get with because I had wicked overprotective parents. If anything was even a little off color, like especially if it was sexual. Alien, my dad threw that at me when I was 7. But don't you dare go watch Austin Powers. I hear they talk about
that
movies.
is weird.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Clips channel. Did you know this isn't our main channel? Yeah, you should subscribe over and find our main videos and our streams as well. We also have a podcast that you can find wherever podcasts can be found. So explore the internet. See you there. But I did find a video here that you made. Frosty reacts to Dawn Trail Raid preview with the text image.
Don't do that.
That says same old, same old. So I didn't watch this video, but
okay, I'll tell you. You want me to tell you what that was based on?
Yes.
They did a live letter where they showed the raid content, and it was the normal mode, the first couple of minutes of one of the first fights, right, in the normal mode, not difficult. And I looked at it, I was like, this looks pretty much the same as what we always see every single time. They didn't show us anything new. It's like 1 or 2 minutes into it, and I'm like, okay. I'm worried, right? I'm concerned. There's a red flag that's up. And that's all I meant to say, right? Is that this is concerned. And there's a good reason to feel concerned about seeing this. And then as soon as the content came out and they had some interesting stuff in it, everyone's like, oh, Frosty, look, you're a stupid idiot. How dare you say anything like that? We knew you were wrong, you dummy. How dare you be concerned about how the content's going to turn out? You fucking dummy. That's all that turned into. And I mean, I do think in the current raid content, there are some things like they haven't been very inventive with a couple of things, but I know that's later down in the expansion cycle where they're going to do stuff and everything else. I love this, by the way. I'm looking at my hand on your side, and there's a little bit of a clip where I bleed right on into your camera. And I'm just like, I'm going to get you.
Oh, perfect. Look at that. Yeah.
I keep seeing it.
Yeah.
Sneaking down.
Yeah. Sorry, I just saw it and I felt like I needed to comment on it.
I can tell you do production. I can absolutely tell.
Yeah. But no, the content, I think the raid, I've only beaten the first 2 fights in the Savage tier so far. I do a lot of stuff in Party Finder, and so it takes me longer. And I also have an event I have to produce that takes a lot of time at the beginning of the release, right? And so I think this is probably some of the most fun Savage has ever been in the game. But there is like some stuff I'm like, I kind of wish they were a little bit more creative here and here, right? Would we see like creativity happening with Final Fantasy 14? I'm hoping they realize there's a lot more they can build on. And a lot of people were complaining about the DPS checks. So I think maybe Yoshida even said, hey, they do seem kind of low.
What was for the?
I was saying that I feel like there's still a couple more inventive things they could do, and there's still a lot of room for growth in Savage and what they could change. The DPS checks still need to be worked on a little bit, I think. Although Party Finder is still having lots of issues with it, like players who aren't optimized and not doing things very well. But then you have to decide what level of difficulty should the content be for people who are not organized versus people who are organized, right? And it becomes a whole other conversation. But I feel like they're going in a good direction, and I'm very content with how they're doing raid stuff. And they're going to mess up sometimes, and I wish the race was longer because I got to tell sponsors how long it's going to be. And when it's the shortest race it's ever been, it makes it harder to sell it later on. But yeah.
Oh, sure. All right, so,
Yeah,
so
that's. Sorry, go ahead.
some questions about that, and I want to work towards
Please.
talking about the event that happened last week as well.
Sure.
Was there ever a time where you feel like things were better? Like so many times when we talk about World of Warcraft or any competitive video game, there's like this golden age of rating, dungeon design, whatever it may be. When you say, I hope it improves, are you thinking of something in the past at all?
You make me sound like an old man and say, oh, it was the best that's ever been back in Midas and Heavensward, man. Those were the good days.
Okay, but that's interesting because it's a point of reference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how they've kind of developed rating in Final Fantasy XIV is they wanted to make really hard content in Heavensward for the people who are asking for it from the previous expansion, and they made the normal mode and the hard mode, the Savage mode. That was the first time they created that, was in Heavensward. So normal mode was supposed to be for the story goers, people who didn't really want difficult content, and then the hard mode, the Savage mode, was supposed to be that challenge for raiders. But then that first fight. Or not the first fight. Oh, yeah. Well, it was kind of the first fight. Had this little damage dummy called Faust, right? Target dummy that you had to clear and do a certain amount of damage. And so many people couldn't get past that. And it just challenged people. And they're like, hey, you guys are really just not good at this game. You don't know how to do optimized rotation. You don't know how to do stuff. You can't get into this content. You can't beat it. And then, the people who could beat it kept going, and they got to the third fight, Living Liquid, the god of all fights, right? One of the best fights that's ever created. And so many people couldn't beat it, and their statics broke apart, and they stopped playing the game, and so many other things, right? And then Square Enix is like, oh, crap, well, we need to, tone it down a little bit. So they went into Midas, which was the fight after that, and they had a really good, setup there with the difficulty and everything else, but it was still really difficult and then not accessible to a lot of players. So they went down one more tier of difficulty, and they ended up with Creator, which is kind of how they stuck with the difficulty afterwards, right? They've changed things here and there, but it's never really got as difficult as it was. And that happened for expansion after expansion after expansion, and they created Ultimate to kind of let people have a more difficult experience in some way, right? People who are still thirsting for that, I guess. And then Yoshida came out and was like, hey, I kind of wish we went back to making things a little bit more challenging and not as predictable and everything else, which he said in his panel over at PAX East, I think.
Yeah, that got
and a few times.
Bunch, and
yeah,
so much talk about it. I mean, we were at the same media tour event, and folks were still asking about it.
Yeah, I mean, and that was their plan. It was just make it interesting and allow them to make mistakes again. And so now we're hitting that point, and I feel like we are having that issue with some players who are getting into it. And this is the first week; it's supposed to be difficult. You don't have a lot of gear to kind of boost, your chances of clearing it. You're doing it on the weakest you'll be in this patch cycle, and a lot of people are struggling with having to get the right jobs together and the right gear sets and hitting their rotation actually properly and everything else, and being denied clears because they're not doing it. They're just going in there and just freeballing it and hoping it works out. But this tier does require a little bit of work, right? I mean, you can get lucky and things you got good players in your group, right? You got people who know what they're doing and you'll get a clear in Party Finder. But unless if you have a static, it's a little bit more difficult to clear this first week. But that being said, the people who are in a static know what they're doing, and it's being cleared really fast for them. And it became the fastest tier that's ever been cleared for these organized players. And so,
I'm curious about this because this was our first time tuning into any sort of Race the World first. I was aware of it as a WoW player, but I didn't follow it closely.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at least keeping in the Final Fantasy XIV corner,
sure.
How do you think it's just the tuning is the only thing impacting how fast it was cleared, or is it also just this is an older game?
It was tuning.
People who are good at this are better at it than they used to be.
They will always get better, right? Players are always going to get better, and so you constantly have to keep up with them in some way without making it too crazy. It's still fun for other players. I think this is a fun tier, right? It's a lot of fun to execute. But the damage was a little bit lower. They did have an issue last expansion with the second tier where there's a 1% damage difference that really just crippled a lot of groups from clearing that last fight. And so they backed off from that and kind of got away from damage checks in some sort of way, I guess. And we feel like they haven't really fully recovered with that. But yeah, the tuning, if it was scaled a little bit higher, it would take these teams a little bit longer to actually get these clears, because they have to optimize and figure out, when we do this mechanic, how do we keep the maximum amount of uptime and not miss GCDs and things like that. And when that starts to come into play, that's when it gets really interesting. But I feel like a lot of groups felt like they didn't have to do it, and so they're a little bit disappointed with that. They just had to figure out the puzzles, which, if there were more puzzles, maybe it wouldn't be a big deal. But I feel like a lot of them just wanted more, right? Just a little bit more out of tier. It's still fun, but the overall challenge really didn't go up. The fun factor went up, but the challenge part I don't think went up that much, if that makes any sense.
Is each expansion a big reset of that player skill from the design, or does it always seem like it's escalating?
I do feel like it's escalating in some way, right? Players are always figuring out, it's becoming more common knowledge what makes a good player good, right? And so I feel like this expansion, people were just haven't rated it a while, and there was a little bit of a dip down. All right, it's been over a year since the last Savage content came out. The extremes came out, and there was no damage check on the extremes at all. And so with the Savage tier here, it feels like still, right? Players went in there expecting, let's just go in there and free ball it, and it didn't work out for a few of the teams. Or not the teams, but I guess people in Party Finder. So yeah, the overall, so it's weird because we're talking about this in two different ways, right? The general common player skill, I think, might have had a little bit of a dip down, but the really serious team play and hardcore groups are still going up. So there is like this disparity between the two different types of players.
That's something that's always a conversation point, I feel like, with any kind of game, especially when there is a competitive aspect. And frequently when you say competitive, you think PvP, but in this case, we are talking about PvE, and it's the same thing. You have a pro grade performance versus the general player base.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've been talking about this all the way since we had a StarCraft show. Like, you're just like, well, do you balance for GSL or do you balance for the 99% of everyone else that plays this game?
Yeah. I mean, it's also different talking about an MMO that's not super competitive based, right? Versus the competitive nature of this game exists from the community. It's not built 100% for competitive nature. I mean, Yoshida recognizes the world race. It's something he pays attention to. Everyone watches the stream over at their office when we have a world race, right? And so they know what's going on and what's happening and how fast these teams are clearing it. And so they do care about that stuff. They also want, jobs not to be excluded when people do stuff together in Party Finder. They want to keep things balanced, and it does become this thing of, how do we make the people happy who want their axolotl mount or whatever, right? From the previous expansion, and also keep the people happy who want more challenging content. And so they create all these different levels of content. Like, they started Criterion to try to create another challenge for people out there in Subway, but you'd only do it once, or you don't do it at all because of the reward structure and a whole bunch of other stuff. But yeah, I think Square Enix is trying to figure that out for sure, how they want to do their development and who they need to make happy, because there's a lot of people who would be happy just with more ways to make nightclubs in the game, right? More content to make that social aspect of role play and stuff a little bit more interesting. And so they have a lot of people to make happy. I think Final Fantasy, I could be wrong, but I feel like Final Fantasy XIV has such a huge variety of different types of players and interest in this game versus other MMOs. It truly feels like it's a huge expanded community where maybe WoW is really focused on raiding, and there's people who care about the story, but not as much as people who care about the story in Final Fantasy XIV, I think.
Yeah.
And so, and there's a lot of role playing that happens over in WoW, but the role playing scene here is different. I don't know. It's hard to really comment too much on WoW, but
I get what you're saying. Like, too, it's virtually impossible to quantify because you can't. A real poll of all of the different player types across like those two big MMOs, WoW and Final Fantasy 14. But I agree with you. I've always looked at, before I came to 14, I looked at World of Warcraft as like that was to me the first game I ever played that felt like it had a lot of different distinct player types that were really into what they were into, and they didn't interact too much with other aspects of the game. But I think there's many more distinct player types in Final Fantasy 14. And I also feel like, and this is probably a bias based on how much I interacted with different angles of World of Warcraft, but I do feel like 14 services more of those different player types than World of Warcraft services those different types of player types. Because like I think back to like I had friends who were really into pet battles in World of Warcraft, and they'd go like a year feeling like they didn't get much new stuff to do, and I feel like story players, every major patch you get new story, dungeon and raid players, you have a really good dependable cadence, which was another thing that I was pleasantly surprised to learn about when I came over to Final Fantasy 14. I'm like, wait, y'all know how many patches you're gonna get?